For most people, Morocco's story already happened. When they think about Morocco, they think about the fairy tale of World Cup 2022. They remember the impossible run, the historic victories, the images of a nation celebrating as an African team reached the semi-finals of the World Cup for the very first time. They remember the defensive resilience, the emotional moments, the underdog spirit that captured the attention of the entire football world. And in many ways, that's exactly the problem. Because while the rest of the world is still looking back at what Morocco achieved in Qatar, Morocco themselves have been focused on something completely different. They are no longer trying to prove that 2022 wasn't a fluke. They are no longer trying to shock the world. That chapter is over. The dangerous thing is that most national teams spend years trying to recreate their greatest moment. Morocco appear to be doing the opposite. Instead of protecting the memory of 2022, they have quietly started building beyond it. And that's why the football world may be making a serious mistake. People still talk about Morocco as if they are a surprise package. They still describe them as a dark horse. They still place them in a category alongside teams that need everything to go perfectly in order to compete with the giants. But what if that description is already outdated? What if Morocco are no longer chasing the elite? What if they are slowly becoming part of it? Because when you look beneath the surface, something unusual starts to appear. The players who carried Morocco to history in Qatar are still there. The identity that made them so difficult to beat is still there. The belief that transformed them into one of the most feared teams at the tournament is still there. Yet at the same time, an entirely new generation is beginning to emerge around them. And that creates a question far bigger than anything Morocco faced in 2022. The real question is no longer whether Morocco can surprise the world again. The real question is whether the rest of the world has noticed what Morocco are becoming. And that's where the conversation around Morocco starts to change. Because this is not really a discussion about whether Morocco are talented. That question was answered years ago. It is not a discussion about whether they can compete with top teams. They have already beaten some of them and pushed others to their limits. And it is not even a discussion about whether they can survive a difficult World Cup group. At this point, Morocco have earned the right to be judged by a much higher standard. The real question is something far more uncomfortable for the traditional powers of international football. What if Morocco possessed something that many elite nations are desperately trying to build but still haven't fully achieved? Stability, continuity, identity. While many national teams spend every tournament searching for a new generation, a new tactical system, or a new leader, Morocco seem to be developing all three at the same time. Look across international football and you'll find talented squads everywhere. You'll find superstar forwards, world-class midfielders, and expensive defenders playing for the biggest clubs in Europe. But talent alone rarely wins international tournaments. The teams that consistently go deep into World Cups are usually the teams that know exactly who they are. They have a clear identity. They have players who understand their roles. They have a structure that survives regardless of who is on the pitch. That is why Morocco's rise may be more significant than most people realize. Because what we're witnessing is not a single golden generation trying to squeeze out one last great tournament. It looks much closer to a football nation building a sustainable cycle of success. And once you begin looking at Morocco through that lens, something becomes impossible to ignore. The squad that shocked the world in 2022 may not even be the most dangerous version of Morocco we've seen. The first signs of that reality are already appearing throughout this new generation. The first sign that Morocco are becoming something different isn't hidden in a tactical diagram or buried inside advanced statistics. It's hidden inside the age profile of this squad. Because while most people are always the same, a special generation reaches its peak, achieves something remarkable, and then slowly fades away as those players age out of the squad. The problem isn't a lack of talent. The problem is succession. Replacing a golden generation is one of the hardest challenges in international football. Morocco seemed determined to avoid that trap. While players like Achraf Hakimi, Yassine Bounou, Naif Agward, Sofiane Amrabat, and Youssef En-Nesyri continue to provide leadership and experience, a new group is beginning to establish itself around them. Players like Elias Ben Scarier, Bilal El Khanis, Ismail Saibari, Chadi Riyad, and Ayoub Bouadi represent something Morocco simply didn't have a decade ago. A continuous pipeline of elite-level talent emerging from some of the best football environments in Europe. And what makes this generation particularly dangerous is that they aren't arriving to save Morocco. They are arriving to strengthen an already successful team. That's a massive difference. Young players usually enter national teams carrying enormous pressure. They're expected to become the future immediately. Morocco's young talents don't have that burden. They are joining a squad that already knows how to compete on the biggest stage. They are learning from players who have already experienced World Cup knockout football, high-pressure matches, and historic victories. Instead of carrying the project, they are accelerating it. That creates a situation few international teams can replicate. Morocco are not choosing between experience and youth. They have both. They are not entering a rebuilding phase. They are strengthening while remaining competitive. And when a team manages to blend proven leaders with fearless young talent, the ceiling becomes much higher than most people expect. But talented young players alone don't explain why Morocco keep getting stronger. The real story is what happens when all of those players enter a system that already knows exactly how it wants to play. And that's where Morocco become genuinely dangerous. What makes Morocco different from many emerging football nations is that their success isn't built on talent alone. Talent can win matches. Talent can create unforgettable moments. But talent by itself rarely creates consistency. And consistency is exactly what Morocco have been building since their breakthrough in Qatar. When most people think about Morocco, they still picture a team defending deep, staying compact, and waiting for opportunities to counterattack. That image made sense in 2022 because it was the version of Morocco the world saw during their historic run. But the reality in 2026 is far more complicated. This team has evolved. Morocco can still defend with incredible discipline when necessary. They can still frustrate elite opponents by closing spaces and forcing mistakes, but they are no longer limited to that approach. They have become far more flexible. Against certain opponents, they are comfortable controlling possession. Against others, they can press aggressively high up the pitch. And when the game becomes chaotic, they transition from defense to attack with a speed that very few national teams can match. That flexibility comes from something every great international side possesses: a clear identity. Every player understands the structure. Every player understands the responsibilities. Every player understands what the team is trying to achieve. That may sound simple, but international football is full of talented squads that never develop that level of collective understanding. And perhaps the best example came in Morocco's recent performance against Brazil. The final score ended in a draw, but the game revealed something much more important. Morocco didn't approach Brazil like an underdog hoping to survive. They pressed them. They disrupted their buildup. They forced mistakes in midfield. At times, they controlled large stretches of the match against one of the most talented squads in world football. That wasn't luck. It wasn't emotion. And it certainly wasn't a one-off performance. It was the result of a system functioning exactly as intended. The frightening part for the rest of the world is that systems tend to improve over time. The more players understand them, the stronger they become. The more experience they gain together, the more difficult they are to break. And that leads us directly to the most dangerous thing about Morocco's 2026 squad. Because having talent is valuable, having a system is even better. But Morocco are beginning to combine something that every World Cup contender fears facing: a team that can beat you in more than one way. And this is where the conversation stops being about Morocco's improvement and starts becoming a problem for everyone else. Because the most dangerous teams at a World Cup are rarely the teams with the biggest stars. They are usually the teams that force opponents into uncomfortable decisions. Teams that make every match feel different. Teams that refuse to give you the same problem twice. And Morocco are rapidly becoming that kind of team. Against one opponent, they can sit deep and defend with extraordinary discipline. Against another, they can push their defensive line higher and attack aggressively through the wings. If a team wants to dominate possession, Morocco can punish them in transition. If a team wants to play cautiously, Morocco have enough technical quality to control large portions of the ball themselves. That adaptability changes everything. Because tournament football is fundamentally different from club football. You don't have months to prepare for a specific opponent. You often have only a few days. The teams that survive deep into tournaments are usually the teams that can solve different problems under different circumstances. Look back at some of the most successful international sides of recent years. Argentina in 2022 didn't win because they played one style. They adapted throughout the tournament. France have reached multiple major finals because they can play multiple types of matches. Croatia repeatedly exceed expectations because they know how to survive completely different game states. Morocco are beginning to enter that category, and that should worry people. Because the version of Morocco that reached the semifinals in Qatar was still largely built around being difficult to beat. The version we're seeing now is becoming difficult to predict. Those are two very different things. A team that's difficult to beat can still be planned for. A team that's difficult to predict becomes a nightmare. Do you press them high? Do you sit deeper? Do you attack through the middle? Do you target the wide areas? Every answer creates a new risk because Morocco now possess enough tactical flexibility to exploit multiple weaknesses. And that's why the discussion around this squad may still be lagging behind reality. Most people are still evaluating Morocco based on what they accomplished 4 years ago, but the evidence suggests something much bigger is happening. This isn't simply a team trying to recreate a magical World Cup run. This is a squad that may be evolving into one of the most complete and versatile sides in international football. And if that sounds exaggerated, the strongest evidence may already be sitting right in front of us. If all of this were based on potential alone, it would still be an interesting story. But what makes Morocco so difficult to dismiss is that the evidence keeps appearing on the pitch. The draw against Brazil wasn't important because of the scoreline. It was important because of what happened during the match. Morocco didn't look overwhelmed by one of football's traditional superpowers. They didn't spend 90 minutes desperately defending their penalty area. In many phases of the game, they looked completely comfortable competing with a squad filled with elite players from the biggest clubs in Europe. And that's not an isolated example. Since the World Cup in Qatar, Morocco have repeatedly shown that their success was not tied to one magical month. The intensity remains, the organization remains, the belief remains. More importantly, the quality of the squad continues to rise. That's the key difference. Football history is full of teams that enjoyed one unforgettable tournament before disappearing back into the shadows. Morocco have done the opposite. Instead of declining after their greatest achievement, they have continued building on top of it. And that's what should attract the attention of the rest of the football world. Because when a team produces one great tournament, you can explain it away. You can call it momentum, you can call it confidence, you can even call it luck. But when the performances continue for years, those explanations start to disappear. At some point, consistency becomes identity. At some point, a surprise becomes an expectation. At some point, a dark horse becomes a contender. That transition is exactly what Morocco appear to be going through right now. The results alone don't tell the whole story. What matters is the trend. Every year, the squad looks deeper. Every year, more young talent arrives. Every year, the tactical structure becomes more mature. And every year, Morocco look increasingly comfortable sharing the pitch with football's traditional elite, which creates a reality that many fans may still be struggling to accept. Morocco are no longer trying to prove they belong at the top level. The evidence suggests they already do. The question now is whether they can take the final step that separates dangerous teams from genuine World Cup threats. And that brings us to the one thing that could still stand in their way. But every serious World Cup contender has a weakness. Not because they're flawed, because international football is unforgiving. And if Morocco are going to make another deep run in 2026, there is one challenge they may face that is very different from anything they encountered in Qatar. Expectation. In 2022, Morocco played with freedom. Nobody expected them to eliminate Spain. Nobody expected them to defeat Portugal. Nobody expected them to reach the semifinals. Every victory increased belief, but very little pressure existed before the tournament began. That advantage is gone now. The football world knows who Morocco are. Opponents prepare differently for them. Managers respect them. Players respect them. And expectations inside Morocco itself have grown dramatically. That's not always easy to manage. History is filled with teams that handled being underdogs far better than they handled being contenders. The psychological burden changes completely. Suddenly, every result is scrutinized. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every disappointing performance feels larger than it actually is. At the same time, Morocco are still relying on several young players who are developing at the highest level. Talent is rarely the issue. Consistency often is. Young players can produce extraordinary performances one month and struggle with pressure the next. That's a normal part of development. There are also questions about depth in certain positions if injuries begin to accumulate during a long tournament. World Cups are often decided by details that nobody sees coming. A suspension, a muscle injury, a single moment of bad luck. And that's why Morocco's biggest obstacle may not be tactical at all. It may be the challenge of carrying expectations that did not exist 4 years ago, because becoming a surprise is difficult. But becoming a permanent member of football's elite is even harder. And that is the final test standing between Morocco and the next stage of their evolution. The frightening part is that if they pass that test, The implications for World Cup 2026 could be enormous. And that's why Morocco may be one of the most uncomfortable teams in the entire 2026 World Cup. Not because they are the favorites, not because they have the most expensive squad, and not because they possess the biggest superstar in the tournament. They're dangerous because they create a problem that very few teams know how to solve. Think about the teams expected to challenge for the trophy. Brazil want to control games through technical quality. France rely on overwhelming athleticism and individual brilliance. England have one of the deepest squads in world football. Portugal continue to accumulate elite talent across almost every position. Spain want to dominate possession and dictate the rhythm of matches. Now imagine facing Morocco in a knockout game. You know they can defend. You know they can counterattack. You know they can press. You know they can survive difficult moments. And perhaps most importantly, you know they won't panic. That's what makes tournament football so dangerous. Knockout matches are rarely decided by who looks best on paper. They're often decided by who remains calm when the pressure becomes unbearable. Morocco have already demonstrated that quality on the biggest stage. They have already walked into hostile environments, faced superior opponents on paper, and refused to break. That experience cannot be manufactured. It cannot be bought. And it cannot be taught overnight. Every major tournament usually produces one team that nobody wants to see on their side of the bracket. A team capable of turning every match into a battle. A team strong enough to eliminate a giant even when the odds suggest otherwise. Morocco fit that description perfectly. The scary part is that they may no longer be limited to playing the role of giant killers. Because giant killers eventually disappear. Contenders don't. And if Morocco continue on their current trajectory, World Cup 2026 may not be remembered as the tournament where they shocked the world again. It may be remembered as the tournament where the rest of the world finally accepted that Morocco had already become something much bigger. For years, the football world has struggled to categorize Morocco. Some called them a Cinderella story. Some called them a golden generation. Some called them the greatest underdog run in modern World Cup history. But none of those labels fully explain what we're seeing today. Because fairy tales are supposed to end. Golden generations are supposed to peak and decline. Underdogs are supposed to return to the shadows once the magic disappears. Morocco haven't followed any of those scripts. Instead, they have continued growing. The leaders who carried them through World Cup 2022 are still here. The tactical identity that made them so difficult to beat is still intact. And around that foundation, a new generation is beginning to emerge with the talent to push this team even further. That's what makes the 2026 Morocco squad feel different. Not because they have one player capable of changing a game. Not because they have one special tournament behind them. But because they are building something sustainable. Something that survives beyond a single World Cup. Something that survives beyond a single generation. And that's a much bigger threat than any individual superstar could ever be. The rest of the world may still be looking at Morocco through the lens of 2022. They may still see a team that shocked football once and happened to catch lightning in a bottle. But the evidence points somewhere else entirely. Morocco are no longer chasing the elite. They are no longer trying to prove they belong. The truly unsettling possibility for the rest of the football world is that Morocco have already crossed that line. And if that's true, then the 2026 Morocco squad isn't unusual because of what it has already achieved. It's unusual because of what it might be about to become.